What did ancient humans do when a child died? When a child died 34,000 years ago in Ice Age Russia, the band buried two boys under more than 10,000 ivory beads, richer than almost any adult burial of the time. So why would a hungry hunting group spend hundreds of hours ornamenting children too young to have earned status? We'll trace 6 burials across 70,000 years and 2 human species to find out what ancient humans did when a child died, and why. East of modern Moscow lies Sungir, one of the most important Upper Paleolithic burial sites ever found. Its defining grave holds 2 boys, 10 and 12, head-to-head surrounded by staggering wealth. Over 10,000 mammoth ivory beads, 20 armbands, 300 pierced fox teeth, 16 carved ivory spears, deer antlers, and 2 human calf bones laid across their chests. Each bead was shaped and pierced by hand. The beadwork alone took hundreds of hours. Here's what doesn't fit. An adult male at the site, 35 to 45, was buried with only about 3,000 beads. Fewer than the boys, in a band where status should be earned, not given. Eric Trinkhaus of Washington University in St. Louis led the 2018 reanalysis in Antiquity. His reading: the status was ascribed, not earned. Someone born into a position or marked out by something other than accomplishment. But the researchers don't dismiss a third option. This could be ritual sacrifice, not a fond farewell. The goods prove investment, and the bones prove difference, but neither tells you the emotion behind the act. The feeling is inference. Therefore, the bones become the deciding evidence. Both boys show clear pathology. One with thigh bones so short and bowed he likely limped. The other with teeth worn almost not at all, probably bedridden and spoon-fed his whole life. Enamel on both records repeated bouts of severe stress. Paul Pettit, a Durham archaeologist, calls burials this elaborate odd, a caution against reading Sungir as a tale of prehistoric kings. The cleanest read, disability, not wealth, singled these boys out for the richest goodbye on site. Whatever their status, these children were not abandoned. They were honored. That's our first answer. Ancient humans invested extraordinary effort to say a child's life mattered. 10,000 beads for 2 broken bodies, and this isn't even the oldest case we have. Thousands of years before Sungir, in a cave far to the south, the same question was already being answered. Quick pause. Subscribe, because we go looking for cases like this every week. Back to the graves. Push the timeline back to a cave in Israel roughly 92,000 years ago. Kafse Cave holds some of the earliest modern human burials known anywhere, confirmed by 2 independent methods, thermoluminescence and electron spin resonance, landing on the same window. Kafse 11 was a juvenile, 12 or 13. A 2014 study led by Helene Cocugno in PLOS 1 used 3D skull reconstruction to find a healed fracture. A traumatic brain injury suffered 8 years before death, likely impairing cognition and social skills since. Weigh that against the world. A mouth the group carried through seasons of moving camp and scarce food, with no return. But bones alone can't tell you how the group felt. What they can show is what the group did. A deliberate burial, deer antlers placed, not scattered, against the hands and chest. Placement is a choice, and choice is the clearest evidence of intention. Therefore, this stands as the oldest clear evidence of long-term care for a disabled child, carried through to a ritual goodbye. A kid who likely couldn't feed himself for 8 years, then buried with intention. Skeptics once argued these were just bodies in natural pits, not real graves. But even the doubters concede the antlers were placed, and placed antlers can't happen by accident. That tension resolves in one detail: the arrangement against the hands, compassion made visible 92,000 years before modern behavior is supposed to exist. Their answer was care, intention, and remembrance, not abandonment. Even a child needing 8 years of help still got an intentional farewell. But it's still our species doing it. The next site asks whether this capacity for care belongs to us alone. At La Ferracie, a rock shelter in France's Dordogne, lies La Ferracie 8, a Neanderthal child, about 2 years old, dated to roughly 41,000 years ago near the end of the Neanderthals' run in Europe. A 2020 study in Scientific Reports combined stratigraphy, direct dating, and molecular identification to show the child was deliberately pit-buried, not simply covered by drifting sediment. Stratigraphy showed a dug grave cutting through older sediment layers, something natural settling doesn't produce. For decades, whether Neanderthals buried their dead was disputed. The old brutish Neanderthal story leaned on that doubt, since abandoned bodies would mean ritual, even grief, belonged to us alone. But direct dating and collagen-based species identification tip it. ZooMS and mitochondrial DNA independently confirmed the child was Neanderthal. 2 methods, same species, no ambiguity. Therefore, intentional child burial isn't exclusive to Homo sapiens. The capacity predates our species and shows up in a cousin whose brain was shaped differently from ours. This doesn't prove Neanderthals grieved as we do. We can't read feelings, only actions. But the actions are enough. A different species, on its own terms, crossed the same line. Different species, same response. Another child, another deliberate goodbye. The impulse, then, is older and wider than us. The next grave belongs to 2 newborns who lived just weeks, and what was poured into their burial cost nothing in calories and everything in time. About 31,000 years ago in Austria, a Gravettian band buried 2 infants under a mammoth's shoulder blade propped on a tusk like a small roof, doused in red ochre. A 2020 ancient DNA study led by Maria Tesler-Nicola in communications biology identified the 2 as male monozygotic twins, the oldest identical twins ever found. Reading the neonatal line in their tooth enamel, researchers determined one twin lived 6 to 7 weeks. The other died at or near birth. By survival logic, newborns are the least valuable members of a hungry Ice Age band. A baby who lives 7 weeks costs a mother's milk and gives nothing back. Yet someone draped them in 53 hand-carved ivory beads and pendants, painted them red, and shielded the grave with a mammoth scapula. But the value on display isn't usefulness, it's attachment. The differing death dates show the grave was reopened, the second twin placed beside the first. Weeks later, someone came back to keep them together. That's grief encoded in ivory and ochre, not ritual for the community's benefit. Therefore, picture the labor. 53 beads, each threaded by hand, for a baby who lived 7 weeks. The band could have left the newborns in a shallow scratch. Instead, they dressed them like they mattered. A third infant nearby, a relative, shows signs of feeding trouble. The group was in a desperate food situation, but even in scarcity, they spent rare leisure time on beads for babies who'd never grow up. Even newborns who'd contributed nothing were buried with remarkable care. The emotional core of the whole question. But grief in the ground isn't the only kind of proof a grave can hold. The next child's body is one scientists are still fighting over, in journals in 2025. In 1998, in Portugal's Lapedo Valley, archaeologists found a nearly intact skeleton stained red with ochre. A 4-year-old buried about 28,000 years ago with pierced shell, in a shelter called Lagar Velho. The burial itself was never in doubt. Someone painted this child red and laid them out with care. Ochre has to be gathered, ground, and applied, and it shows up on child after child across these sites, from Krems to Lapedo. Whatever it meant, it was worth spending on the young dead. A year later, Eric Trinkhaus and João Zilhau proposed the child was a Neanderthal modern human hybrid based on skeletal features, a claim that's never settled. Some accept it, many argue the features fall within modern human variation. But the 2025 hydroxyproline radiocarbon study in Science Advances redated the child and sharpened the timeline of sapiens Neanderthal contact in Iberia. It did not end the morphology argument. The hybrid label stays contested. Regardless of who this child was, the burial itself is not in dispute. The care shown to this child is the point of the story. Therefore, the honest read holds two things at once. The burial is fact. The hybrid identity is contested. Everyone agrees someone painted this 4-year-old red and sent them off with shells. The care is settled. The argument is only over what box to put the bones in. What's strange is the framing. A grave clearly intentional, yet a quarter century later, the fight is over. What the child was loved. That it's still argued over in 2025 means it was done well enough 28,000 years ago to last. Identity in death may be contested, but the act of marking the child isn't, and the last grave reaches further into the present. Near Lake Baikal in Siberia, a 4-year-old boy was buried roughly 24,000 years ago with stone tools, pendants, and a small Venus figurine, found in the 1920s and filed away for most of a century. That figurine matters. Venus figurines turn up across Ice Age Europe, hundreds of kilometers west. Proof this Siberian group was part of a wider world of symbols and trade. In 2013, a team led by Eske Willerslev of Copenhagen sequenced the boy's genome in Nature, the oldest modern human genome sequenced at the time. His DNA matched Western Eurasians and uniquely Native Americans, but not East Asians. Under the old model, Native Americans descended purely from East Asian ancestors who crossed from Siberia. A Siberian boy with Western Eurasian genes shouldn't map onto the Americas, yet his genome clearly did. But the team concluded that roughly a third of Native American ancestry traces to a population like the one at Malta, later named the ancient North Eurasians. Native Americans, it turns out, are a mix of an East Asian lineage and this Western Eurasian one. Before this child reshaped our understanding of human ancestry, someone first chose to bury him with care. Even here, the story begins not with genetics but with how ancient humans treated a dead child. Therefore, a 4-year-old buried with a small figurine on a frozen riverbank turned out to be a direct genetic ancestor of the peoples who later crossed into the Americas. One child's grave rewrote the peopling of a hemisphere. We still don't know where the two lineages met. Willerslev says that question stays open. But the core finding holds, and it came out of a child's bones, not a chief's, not a warrior's. The smallest, most easily forgotten burial on this list didn't just change how we understand human ancestry, it reminded us that before changing history, this child was first laid to rest with care. 6 burials, 70,000 years, 2 species, different tools, different beliefs, different ways of surviving the Ice Age. Yet, at the one moment that should have looked the same everywhere, the death of a child, the same answer keeps showing up in the dirt. So what did ancient humans do when a child died? Across 70,000 years and different human species, the answer stays consistent. They remembered them, invested time they couldn't spare, and marked their passing with intention. They refused to let those children disappear without meaning. Ancient humans did not look away. They picked up a needle, a bead, a handful of ochre, and said without words that this life had mattered. If that changed how you picture the ancient world, subscribe. There's a full run of these buried mysteries on the channel, and the next one's playing right there.